Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome in to Green Dot Daily, Action Network's daily show, live every weekday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Action app. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, give us a like and subscribe. It really helps. We've got a stack show today. MLB and Premier League picks from Anthony Dabbundo, plus Billy Ward talks UFC 301. But let's start with a couple of Eastern Conference series wrapping up on the hardwood last night. And Damian Lillard returned from injury to try and salvage the Bucks season against the Indiana Pacers, but it was not enough. Dame time dropped 28 points, but the Pacers ran away with the win behind two unlikely heroes, Obi Toppin and TJ McConnell. Pacers win 120-98. And of course, the best series of the first round came to a close. Knicks take down the 76ers. Jalen Brunson went nuclear again and led New York to a win behind 41 points, including 14 in the fourth. However, with tied up at 11 with under 30 seconds to play, it was not Brunson, but Josh Hart with the dagger three to give the Knicks a lead. It would not let up. Knicks win 6, 118-115. That brings us to the conference semifinals matchup between these offensive-heavy Pacers and defensive-minded Knicks. New York minus 225 favorites with game one set for Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. For what it's worth in that game, the Knicks 6.5-point favorites over Indy in game one at Madison Square Garden. With that, we welcome in Matt Moore, Chris Raybon to the program. We're going to react to the Sixers and where they should go from here, but I do have to start. Chris Raybon, I do not forget, 2 weeks ago, we talked, and you said the 76ers were going to beat the Knicks. Win against the home New York pride that you came from. You went to LA, you switched up on us. Your initial thoughts?
I mean, first of all, this series was really like 3-3-1 because the referee stole one from Philly. But no, it was an all-time series. I think I selfishly kind of wanted it to go 7, but of course, Tyrese Maxey couldn't quite get it done 2 weeks in a row, 2 games in a row. But this second round series should be really interesting. Knicks Pacers, you have just that outlying offense versus kind of an outlying defense. So I'm excited.
Yeah, and Matt, I just want to, I saw you shaking your head vehemently over there. I do want to say before, you'll talk about the offseason that's ahead for the Sixers, but I did watch the entire game. So is this like a proud father-son moment where I'm finally coming around toward the NBA?
Yeah, I'm very, I've been watching these Instagram videos of like gentle parenting in adult situations. So it's like, oh, good job. You watched a whole game. Good job, Charlie. So, look, the Sixers offseason is going to be really fascinating. They've got basically no one on the books. Like, no one's on the books. Tobias Harris, free agent, which that's fitting since he got an early start on that by doing nothing last night but cardio. No one else is on the Sixers books except Embiid and Maxey. So they're going to have a lot of options to reshape the roster. They can completely rebuild around them. The question is going to be, does Joel Embiid want to stay there? That's always a question when you have stars in the NBA that haven't won. We'll see what Embiid kind of comes to, but I definitely think Maxey's probably earned his way into Embiid's heart, and he wants to play with that guy. The question, I think, is really going to be, does Daryl Morey go after a third star? A lot of questions about Jimmy Butler, who's contract extension eligible down in Miami. Paul George, who's going to probably be a free agent this summer. Klay Thompson, who's going to be a free agent this summer. They can add a third star next to those guys and then fill in with minimums. They're going to have to get creative, but I think there's probably going to be an opportunity. It'll be really, really interesting to see what the Sixers do this summer.
Yeah, and it felt like, aside from Tobias Harris in that last game, the Sixers, finally played a good playoff series and just ended up losing instead of, getting all the criticism they deserved in recent years. But let's talk Knicks Pacers now. Obviously, the Knicks, they're favorites to pull this one out. They'll be home. I'm assuming you guys both think the Knicks will pull this one out. But Matt, I want to start with you. What do you think, from a betting standpoint on this series here?
Market's really tough. So Knicks are minus 250 consensus in the market to win the series, but Knicks in 6 or fewer is minus 130. So you can get this small plus number on Pacers just to be able to get to 7 games or win it outright, which is a weird kind of the hold on the series. I think is pretty obnoxious. The Knicks went 1-2 versus the Pacers in the regular season. They struggled with top 10 offenses. They do not have a good record this season versus top 10 offenses. My question, I think, this kind of come down to is Indy's offense better than what Philly had in the first round? Not overall, but with a limited hurt Joel Embiid, a non-existent Tobias Harris, and Tyrese Maxey really for the first time being in this role in a playoff series. They were throwing out Kyle Lowry and Nick Batum. Pacers have weapons everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I think this matchup is pretty favorable towards Indiana. I just don't think they're going to win. The Knicks are going to get so many offensive rebounds in this series, as they seem to always do. And I just feel like they'll wind up taking this. Finding an angle to bet on it, quite honestly, though, pretty tough. I lean towards something like Knicks in 7. I think the Pacers are going to be able to actually push this series, but I can't get a good price on Pacers plus 2.5. So with that in the market, I'm going to have to take my time. We'll talk about it on buckets over the weekend.
We all deserve a Knicks Celtics Eastern Conference Finals. Raybon, I want to ask you, you're on board with the Knicks pulling this series out, or are you going to still, throw your New York fandom in the back and just bet the Pacers?
Now, I think the Knicks have the edge in this one. This is playoff basketball. I think that really favors the defensive team, more than even the regular season. With Philly, it was different. I mean, Philly was playing at, nearly a 70-win pace with Joel Embiid. I mean, we kind of know what this Indiana team is. It's going to be hard, like kind of what Matt alluded to. I'm sure the dog in the series, will win a couple of games, but it might not just be the games we think they're going to be. It's just going to be some random shooting variance games. Or if Jalen Brunson, gets hurt or something like that, because I know he was kind of banged up at points, that, would kind of tilt it. But besides that, I think the environment favors, the defensive team, and that's the New York Knicks.
Let's talk about tonight's games real quick. We'll start Cleveland, Orlando, 7 p.m. start, the first one on the docket. The Magic, they're 4-point favorites, undefeated at home this playoff series. Raybon, your pick in this matchup.
So I'm going to go with Evan Mobley under 10.5 rebounds. And, his rebounding numbers, whether Jared Allen is on or off, which is kind of surprising, they don't change. They're actually a slight bit better with Jared Allen on the court. And, that's kind of big because I think, he's still questionable to go. The books are kind of pricing him as if Allen would be out, I think. And, Mobley's rebound percentage against Orlando, it's going to change whether he's home or on the road. We've kind of seen that in the series where, Orlando just shoots a lot better at home. They're at home now for game 6, and they had an NBA low 38.2 rebounds per game given up at home compared to 41.5 on the road. So that's about a 3 rebound per game difference. That's going to cut into Mobley's numbers. And if you look at his numbers at home this year, he had big home road splits as well. 10.1 rebounds per game in 30.6 minutes per game at home. But when he goes on the road, that drops to 8.4 rebounds, even though he's playing more minutes. So I like Mobley to go under his rebounds tonight.
Yeah, and both those games on the road were definitely, Magic pulled away in the second half, maybe limited some minutes too. And Mobley, he didn't go over it in either of those games. As you mentioned, there's a stark difference between his home and road performances. But the other game on the docket tonight, 9:30 p.m. Mavericks, 7.5-point favorites, 8-point favorites, depending where you look. No Kawhi Leonard for the Clippers tonight. The inconsistencies of Paul George and James Harden loom large sometimes. Matt, are the Clippers going to get the job done and be able to pull a game 7? And where are you headed?
I'm not going to take him on the money line. I'm going to go ahead and grab the points, though, with Clippers plus 8. There's a weird trend in the spot. So teams that lose game 5 at home and they're on the road for an elimination spot where you would think that they're like, all right, we're done here. They're actually 18-14 straight up and 20-12 ATS at 63% against the spread since 2003. So for whatever reason, it's like backs against the wall. These teams respond and force a game 7. Every game's had wild swings and star performance that have been kind of counter-directional. Either Luka and Kyrie are good and PG and Harden are bad, or it's the opposite. What if both of them play well for once? What if all 4 of them play bad at the same time? Kidd has burned a lot of his adjustments in this series. He went to a double big lineup, which absolutely killed the Clippers with Kleba next to Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively. They played those kind of lineups for 34 minutes in game 5. That was a huge swing, but it does mean that Ty Lue gets an opportunity now to try and figure out a counter for it, whether he's going to try and go smaller versus that or try and go bigger with PJ Tucker at the 4. These games have trended towards unders. Low-scoring games are prevalent in game 6s, and if we're in a tighter game with a lower-scoring margin, 8's a lot of points, even for a home team with Dallas. So I'll go ahead and I'll grab the points here with Clippers plus 8, but I don't want them on the money line. I do think the Mavericks close them out tonight in a close win.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, everyone that performs. It felt like everyone on the Clippers last game just did not have a good night. Even Norm Powell was shooting bad. Paul George, James Harden, obviously the storyline there in that game 5. Kleba also, by the way, 5 of 7 from 3. I'm not sure if he did that again. You put it out 100 times if he makes that, more than 10 times. But we'll go to Raybon now. Raybon, your pick is on a player prop in this matchup, and you like targeting Paul George.
Yeah, I like him to go over his rebound prop at 5.5. He's a guy who, when Kawhi Leonard's off the court, he's rebounding a little bit more. His rebounds per 36 minutes go up about a half rebound, and that gets him over 6. And, his minutes have really been a little bit down compared to where you would expect in this series. But I expect him to play over 40 minutes. He played 43 minutes a couple games ago. And then, in that last game, as you mentioned, he just, that whole team just didn't shoot well. The starters got pulled early, but usually don't see, especially in an elimination game, starters getting pulled early in back-to-back games, even if they're losing. So I expect, the Clippers and Paul George to give it all they have in this spot. And, with the Mavericks, PJ Washington, he's not a great rebounder at that 4 position for them. Matt did mention, they might go to some more double big lineups, but in general, I think Paul George should be able to get us here with the 6 or more rebounds.
Right. You mentioned a couple of games ago when he played 40 plus minutes. He had 33 points, 8 assists, 6 rebounds. I'm curious real quick, Raybon, just, I like to think big when I bet a lot. And, given the fact that Paul George is probably going to be on the floor for 40 plus minutes and he's going to have the ball in his hands for most of those possessions, am I crazy to want to consider either a double-double or a triple-double prop on him?
You're not crazy. I mean, he actually had 11 rebounds in the most recent game. Now, rebounds are a little bit high variance, but that's actually kind of perfect because we know Paul George, with the points, he's obviously going to get there. And because of, playing such a ball dominant role, especially after, I think that would benefit them more with, Harden kind of, you never know what you're going to get out of Harden from one game to the next. I could see it, playoff P could be back. So I don't hate it.
Yeah, and Russell Westbrook also has been absolutely horrific during this series. The one that we thought the series was going to be the best of the first round, it was ended up being Knicks Sixers. Maybe we'll get a good game 6, and maybe the Clippers can force a game 7. But Matt Moore, Chris Raybon, thank you so much for hopping on. Enjoy the action, and best of luck.
Thanks, man.
It was a pleasure.
And now let's hear a clip from Mike Conti and Sean Zerillo breaking down the Kentucky Derby, which goes underway tomorrow. This is their latest on the Action Network podcast.
Let's discuss the favorite win contender, Sean Zerillo. You can start us.
Yeah, I'm going to take Fierceness as my lone A on top. In terms of how I handicap this, I think Fierceness wins this race 50% of the time. If he runs his best race, I don't think anybody else beats him. And he's already run a 110 Beyer speed figure, which is, I believe, the highest for any Derby prep race in the past decade. So he has the top 2 speed figures of any horse in this field. And normally you'd say, okay, you expect some regression, you expect other horses to improve. No, I don't think he's run his best race yet. And he's training as well as any horse at Churchill Downs in the week leading up to the race. By all accounts from Clockers and his trainer, Todd Pletcher, he's sitting on a career best race. He lost 2 starts back in the Holy Bowl. It was his first start of his form cycle. Didn't seem to have enough in the tank down the stretch. Came back, set the record for this group in terms of speed figures for the year with the 110 in the Florida Derby and just blasted away from that field. And if he's taking any sort of improvement off of that race, they're not going to touch him. If he just runs back to that race, he probably still wins. So I think the rest of this field needs him to regress. And then they also need to have somebody step up in order to take down Fierceness.
I'm not going to let Fierceness beat me in any of my bets, but I'm looking elsewhere for top selections. And my top selection, I'm going a little bit further to the inside to the number 8, Just a Touch. A couple of interesting things to look at with Just a Touch. One, he only made his career debut back in January. Similar to his sire, his father, Justify, who won the Derby and won the Triple Crown as a 3-year-old who never ran as a 2-year-old. Justify, put away this age-old just something that hadn't been done before, where you hadn't run at 2 and then you win at 3 to win the Derby at 3. And so Just a Touch coming in very, very lightly raced, coming in off, I would argue, a really good, if there's such a thing, second place finish in the Bluegrass Stakes. the jockey of Just a Touch, Florent Giroux, when he came off after that bluegrass, he said that he thought that Just a Touch had another year, and he didn't know as though that he was going to need it. He thought Sierra Leone was too far back, wasn't going to be able to get there. If Just a Touch can take a step forward, and given how lightly raced he's been, I think it's very realistic to assume that he's going to take another step forward. So for a lot of those reasons, I'm ending up on my top selection, number 8, Just a Touch at 10-1.
And we welcome in Anthony Dabbundo to talk some MLB. We'll also get to some soccer in a little bit, but we have to start with where you're going to be. Boots on the ground tonight, 6:40 p.m. Eastern. Phillies, they're minus 175 favorites over the Giants. We were talking just before the show about Aaron Nola having that extra off day, possibly an advantage, haven't pitched in a week. But how do you see this one playing out? Over under right around 7.5.
Yeah, you mentioned Aaron Nola. He had a really poor start to the season. His first 3 starts, the strikeout to walk ratio was 10 strikeouts, just 8 walks, and his velocity was down on his fastball, sitting around 90 miles an hour. Some of it was weather related. He pitched in some pretty cold conditions, some pretty rainy conditions against St. Louis, but the last few outings have been closer to the vintage Nola that we're used to seeing. And I think that's closer to what we should expect from Nola going forward now that he's kind of fully into the season here. So his last 23 innings across 3 starts, 26 strikeouts, just 3 walks, 3 homers allowed. It's been really impressive from Nola. And Jordan Hicks, since he's moved to the rotation, has produced a 58% ground ball rate on that sinker. And it's a really impressive pitch because it used to be that he would come out of the bullpen, he would throw 102. He had no idea where it was going. He lived high in the zone. And the Giants have kind of changed him. And as he's transitioned into a starter, he's throwing a lot of the sinkers, walking fewer guys, getting more ground balls. And it's been what I think is pretty sustainable production from Hicks as a starter. So with both bullpens fully rested, kind of buying both starters here tonight. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I like under 7.5, minus 105 in that game on Apple TV tonight.
What's the win like too? You didn't even talk about that with Citizens Bank Park.
I know. Well, if you listen to Payoff Pitch, I went into kind of like my weatherman voice. I will save the listeners that, but there should be a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind from third base right field across the field tonight. So not a usual wind we see at Citizens Bank Park, but not one that helps run in scoring. It might hurt a little, but overall it's a pretty neutral wind at the bank tonight. The bank, one of the more wind adjusted ballparks because of how open the back is traditionally in the sport. And so it's always important to monitor the wind at Citizens Bank Park. And I will be doing so from section 137 if anyone wants to come say hi.
Yes. Throw something at him, either or. You could do one of the two. But let's move to the other game tonight. The primetime game, 10:10 p.m. Eastern. I guess not really prime time, but Dodgers minus 116 favorites against the Atlanta Braves. Braves, obviously the underdogs as they're coming over to LA. Over under right around 9.5. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, so Braves, do get an off day after their trip to Seattle, so staying out west. But I do like the Dodgers here, minus 115. It's all about the 2 starting pitchers. Charlie Morton has the lowest strikeout rate of his, recent career since he joined Houston. He was of course, a sinker baller in 2015 with the Pirates. He had a low strikeout rate then, but this is the lowest he's been since then. And his swinging strike rate has also steadily declined the last couple of years to be the lowest since 2015 as well. So there's some concerns about Morton, age 40 season, kind of losing some skills as he ages. And he still has the great curveball, but the fastball doesn't look as good this year. The stuff is down overall. So all kind of lines up with just general aging and Morton kind of reaching the end of his career here. Still can be effective, but not as good as maybe the market thinks. Gavin Stone, 16% strikeout rate in 2024. Not good. But the underlying metrics, they suggest he's been a little better than that. If you look at his swinging strike rate, it's well above league average by almost 2%. He's generating a lot of weak swings early in counts, weak contact, and Atlanta loves to swing early in counts. So maybe Stone doesn't rack up the strikeouts tonight, but going forward, I do expect him to strike more guys out, and I do expect him to continue to generate that weak contact on the changeup. So I think Stone is a bet on pitcher, and I think Morton's a bet against, and I like the Dodgers as a small home favorite tonight, minus 115.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The Atlanta Braves, obviously the offense, Matt Olson has been playing as well. Austin Riley maybe turning a corner. Ronald Acuna also struggling in that last series against Seattle. Gavin Stone projects as a high 8 strikeout guy, and we really haven't seen that come to fruition. But it'll be interesting to see that tonight. I also, obviously, we did pay off pitch together on Friday morning, also on the Dodgers tonight. So hopefully I don't mush you. But speaking of mushing, it's time for a little bet and breakfast on the soccer side of things. And if anyone here is a first-time listener, anytime I tell Anthony Dabbundo, for some reason, the bet goes just right down the garbage chute. This past week, it was PSG over 1.5. They hit every single post possible. But we'll start with a Saturday 7:30 a.m. kickoff. Arsenal, Bournemouth. Arsenal's minus 500 favorites, but you do have a way of betting this one.
Yeah, so as we get into the end of the season here, you have Arsenal 1 point ahead, City ahead in terms of the projections because they have the extra game to play that they'll play May 15th against Tottenham. But you tend to see what's called the must-win tax, and teams that need to win have an increased motivation playing teams this week, Bournemouth and Wolves, that really don't have anything to play for, playing for pride. Bournemouth and Wolves both have a chance to finish in the top half, could have great finishes for their club, but nothing particularly inspiring about their effort levels. So the market overreacts. And so Arsenal is minus 500, laying 2 full goals. I have value on Bournemouth. If my pure number has this closer to 1.3 goals. So you're seeing a huge inflation on Arsenal, and the same is true for the next game. Arsenal's been the best defensive team in the world this season, but they have shown some real cracks the last 5-6 matches. They played Villa. They were unable to keep control in the second half. They conceded twice. They played Bayern in the Champions League twice, conceded 3 goals and over 3.5 XG over 2 legs there. Then you saw even against Tottenham last weekend in the derby, conceding 2.5 expected goals, 1.7 non-penalty. Only 5 teams in the whole league have created over 1 XG against Arsenal this year. So, and it's been Villa and Spurs in the last couple of weeks. So you're seeing some cracks in the Arsenal defense, I think, as they reach the end of the season, the fatigue a little bit. And it's just really hard to sustain the level of defense they were playing at for large stretches of the season. So Bournemouth, 7th best attacking numbers in the Prem. I think they're live to score. And much as the market is inflating Arsenal on the spread, they're doing the same with deflating Bournemouth's odds of scoring here. I like both teams to score yes at minus 115. Do think Arsenal ultimately gets this done, but I think it's going to be a sweaty one for them. I do think Bournemouth gets on the board. So I like both teams to score yes in the first matchup. 7:30 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. So bright and early. We'll be up. Hopefully cashing some tickets.
Yeah, so I think you might know that I'm probably not going to be tailing this one because there's absolutely zero way I'm waking up at 7:30 a.m. to sweat out some soccer. But you do mention Man City has a game in hand. They're minus 250 to win the EPL. Arsenal plus 200. Liverpool falling out of that race after a tie and a loss in their last 2. But let's talk about that Man City game against Wolves, 12:30 p.m. kick. So a little bit of a brunch, if you will. How are you betting this one?
So another matchup where City is a 2.5 goal favorite. I have this one closer to 2, 1.78. So, they're inflated as well, but I think the better way to go against City here, because City could chase extra goals late. They could push because they could try to catch Arsenal in goal difference, which they're currently behind, is to play Wolves to score, plus 120. And Wolves, went through a period in, March into April where they had none of their best attackers fit. Pedro Neto got hurt. Matheus Cunha was out. Hwang Hee-chan dealt with some injuries. They were playing some real skeleton unit squads out there, and they just struggled to create chances and score consistently. And now they have Cunha and Hwang back in the lineup, 2 forwards that have been key producers for them this year. And I think the other side of this is that if you watch City, the eye test and the numbers all kind of match up in the sense that this defense is just not as good as it used to be. And you watched it in the FA Cup when they gave up over 1 XG to Chelsea. Last weekend against Nottingham Forest, Forest created over 2 expected goals, missed a handful of easy chances. Now, they didn't end up converting them, and City kept a clean sheet. They won 2-0, ho-hum. But it was alarming, and City just doesn't look the same defensively this year. There are more holes in behind, and Wolves are a great transitional team. They're good on set pieces. 2 weeks ago, City played Luton Town. And Luton Town, one of the 3 worst teams, I'd argue 2 worst teams in the league, was plus 105 to score, and they did. They lost 5-1, but they scored. And now Wolves, who are considerably better than Luton, are plus 120 to score. I don't really agree with the market, just overtaxing the 2 title favorites. So I'm going to take Wolves to score at plus 120 and cross my fingers they can get one. And Like I said, same thing with Arsenal. I do think City wins, but I think the way City wins these last 4 matches is not by keeping clean sheets, but just kind of outscoring teams, and they're gonna have to do that to win the title.
I'm curious. Do you think there's any chance Wolves or Bournemouth is able to pull off the upset tomorrow?
For sure, I do. And it's funny because, when you look at these 3 teams that were in the title race, all 3 are massive favorites almost every game. And, West Ham, Liverpool goes to West Ham, they're laying -200. They draw. Liverpool plays Palace, they're -400. They lose. Arsenal hosts Aston Villa, they're -350. They lose. And so do I think it's going to happen? No, because, they're -500 and -1200 for a reason.
Yeah.
But I do think, if you wanted to take, plus a half on both teams, on Bournemouth and Wolves, you're going to get like plus 350 on Bournemouth and like plus 600-700 on Wolves just to get a result. Not even a win, because a draw is just as bad as a loss for these 2 teams. It's probably worth some sprinkles.
All right, so I'll give you the bad news before I let you go. I will be betting on Wolves to score. So if you want to be for the guys at home, they should probably not be betting the Wolves plus a half, because unless it's going to be 0-0, which seems unlikely, Charlie the Mush is coming into town. But Anthony Dabbundo, thank you so much for hopping on. Best of luck on tonight's MLB action and tomorrow's soccer slate.
Thanks for having me. And go Wolves.
Moving over to the Octagon, UFC 301 gets underway on Saturday out in Brazil. For an entire breakdown on the event, you can head over to the Action Network podcast, where Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward break down their entire card with their favorite underdogs, props, and more. And speaking of Billy Ward and the Action Network podcast, Billy joins me now to talk more about this UFC 301. It's not quite the headliner of UFC 300, right? Like, to the outside casual UFC fan, a lot of these names are not household names. Jose Aldo does return from retirement for this co-main event. But I do want to ask you, taking, a step back from it all, every fighter on this card is one of the fight, at least, and features a Brazilian. And obviously the fights are in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So I wonder, does your handicapping process change at all, given the fact that, maybe a Brazilian fighter gets a little bit of a hometown benefit?
Yeah, there's a couple parts to that. It seemed like in recent years, the UFC has done a lot better job of bringing the commission with them. So they have the judges from, the usual judges make the trip over. So it's not like there was a time 5 or 6 years ago where the first scoring criteria was who's Brazilian and who isn't. And, it kind of, you knew if it was going to a decision, it had to be extremely one-sided to go against the hometown fighter. I don't think that's the case anymore, but I still think it is an edge for the Brazilian fighters, simply because when they do anything positive, the crowd goes crazy and makes it seem like a big deal. And when the, foreign fighter does something well, you don't hear anything about it. And subconsciously, that's got to wear on the judges. If, every little strike thrown, you get a huge reaction out of the crowd. And the other part of it is the UFC matchmakers know what they're doing. They want the hometown crowd to be happy here. If you look at the lines, a lot of these Brazilians are massive favorites, especially on the main card. So it's not necessarily that the judges or the fighters or anything have something to do with that. But a lot of times we see when the UFC is on the road, they kind of stack the card for the hometown favorites. They want to make it a showcase for those guys. They want everyone to have a good time. So that's a big part of it too. It's just anytime we're handicapping fights, you want to think like the matchmakers and what they're trying to do here. And this one definitely seems like they're trying to have a fun night for the Brazilian hometown crowd.
So let's talk about the hometown Brazilian crowd and that main event. The flyweight championship features Alexandre Pantoja, Steve Erceg coming in. Steve Erceg obviously hasn't lost yet in the UFC. He's 3-0. He's fought them all in the past year. Pantoja was a pretty heavy favorite, and obviously Erceg's taken some money around plus 210 on open, come down to around plus 160, but you're buying back and backing the Brazilian Pantoja to make a statement in this main event.
I am. And, speaking of the matchmaking, it's kind of an interesting one here. They clearly needed a Brazilian champion to headline this card. We didn't have the big names. There's only 2 in the UFC. One of them just fought at UFC 300. Right. Kind of had to be Pantoja here. And he's beaten multiple times the next 2 best guys in the division, in Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno. I think I've heard rumors they actually offered this fight to Muhammad Mokaev. He just fought 2 months ago. Steve Erceg fought on the same card. Erceg said yes to this one. That's a big part of my handicap here, is Pantoja is such a unique challenge given his grappling ability. that I don't like that Ursug's taking this on only 8 weeks. He's never had a 5-round fight. Probably didn't get a full camp in here because it's, like I said, just under 8 weeks since his last fight. Probably needed a week or two off to recover from that one before he got back after it. And I don't know how he's going to deal with that grappling. You know, if you had a longer camp, you can work. Are we trying to stop the takedown? Are we trying to get up once we get taken down? Are we just trying to stay safe and then land big shots? Those are decisions that have to be made and worked through and played with in camp. I don't think he had the time for that. So the big grappling advantage for Pantoja is there. I'm high on Ursig as a prospect, but just given the circumstances of this one, and if there is a little bit of judging bias in there, I'm fine paying -185 for Pantoja. Some books you can do a spread where Pantoja's -5.5. That's around even money. Kind of like that too. That pays off if he wins 4 or 5 rounds unanimously or with a stoppage. I think that's probably the likeliest outcome here, is that outside the first round or two, it's one-way traffic for Pantoja.
Yeah, so all 3 fights in the past year for Ursig. Takes another fight on short notice against the veteran of Pantoja. Does have the age advantage and, you know, the title as well. I was looking back at his fights, has beaten basically everyone inside that top 10 of the flyweight, division. But taking a step back, looking back at the early prelims, you have another bet that you like here, and you are backing another Brazilian here, Mauricio Hufi against Jamie Mullarkey. Tell us what you like. It's a bit of a prop as well factored in there.
Yeah, I did take a couple non-Brazilians if you listen to the full Action Network podcast. pretty heavy Brazil card here, partially because of that matchmaking I talked about. Jamie Mullarkey's been in the UFC for a long time. He's 500. You know, he beats the guys who are bad, doesn't really make a big splash. The UFC did not make this fight because they're trying to make a star out of Jamie Mullarkey. They're trying to see what they have out of Hufi, who's making his UFC debut. Hufi is 9-1. All 9 of those wins are by knockout. Extreme power. And if you look back at Jamie Mullarkey over the last couple of years, he's been knocked out twice in the last year, once just back in December. And it's not just that he's been finished by knockout. If you look at some of the knockouts, they're pretty ugly. I think his chin is just gone. He's not that old, but taking a lot of damage, a guy who likes to brawl. It just makes it a horrible matchup. And I think the UFC put that together to make Hufi look good. So with all that said, Hufi by knockout is even money, and he's close to a 2-1 favorite overall. Those should be much closer. I'd be fine with playing his money line, but the overwhelming majority of his win condition is based on a knockout, so we might as well get the better price.
Yeah, obviously you mentioned Mullarkey has lost 2 of his last 3. The last fight coming in December, 2 of those 2 losses were knockout, as you mentioned. Height advantage to Mullarkey, the age advantage to Hufi, who's making his debut. You'd expect a little bit of him to come out a little bit fired up, if given the fact that it's, you know, a chance for him to make a name for himself in the UFC in front of his home crowd. So Billy Ward, thank you so much. Best of luck this entire weekend. Obviously, all your picks can be found on the Action Network podcast, where you didn't bet every single Brazilian, but for this show in particular, you do have Pantoja and Hufi.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
And just a reminder that any pick given out on the show, like you just heard from Billy Ward, you can easily reference by following Green.Daily at Green.Daily in the Action Network app. We keep track so you don't have to. And that's going to be all for Green.Daily on this beautiful Friday. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the playoff sports. I'm Troy DiSturco. Thanks again for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. If you're watching on the Action app, thanks for hanging with us. Just a programming reminder, Action Island is live at 5 p.m. Eastern on our Action Network YouTube channel and the Action app. Clippers, Mavericks, same game parlay. You're not going to want to miss it. Have a great weekend.